Sorry someone was late. This is the Community Economic Development Committee, and Natalie's going to do a roll call.
Okay, Mr. Revelton.
Here.
Mr. Trainee.
Here.
Mr. Peterson. Might call in later. Mr. Constant.
No, he-
Mr. Dunbar.
Here.
Chair, you have a quorum.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
just note for the record, maybe you already did it, Pete should
Right,
be
he's called.
excused.
Yeah,
Okay.
he's excused. Okay, so we should go around this table a bit. Start with Pete.
Dean Gates, Assembly Council.
Chris Schutte, Office of Economic Community Development.
Michelle McNulty, Inland Planning Director.
Bob Dole, Development Services Department.
And we got a crowd here, Jack.
Jack Ross, Code Enforcement.
Interpreter.
Natalie Wilson.
Ryan Yale, Planning Department. Dave Whitfield, Planning Department. Vince Beltrami, AFL-CIO.
Eliza Mears, Department of Health and Social Services. Sarah Oaks with Alaska Charts.
Jed Smith, AMCO.
Pamela Dean.
Rich Byrne, Land Use Enforcement.
Jeff Hickman, Health and Human Services, or APU Health Department, change their name.
All right, thank you.
Eugene Crawley.
Oh, sorry. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so first thing on here is a report on progress on the Bendon Adams report. And we have summary, kind of the action items here. And we have our new building official. And he and I had talked briefly last week, I think.
That's on the table.
You know it. Do you have union requirements
Is that approved by OSHA?
Approved by OSHA.
So is this
Yes, this is it.
Okay.
Chair, our vision on doing this was Chris Schutte was going to give an overview of how we got here. Then Michelle and I were going to tag team what we're
Okay.
doing in our departments to address your concerns.
Perfect. Okay, so and basically that's it, just an update. What's going on with the new building official, to a large extent? And I think we expect to have periodic reports just to see how progress is going. So, Chris?
Yeah, good morning. I've never seen that screen before. There we go. Mark Butler is going to be my Vanna White today. So thank you for this opportunity to talk about the Bendon Adams report and the process improvement that we're going through here in the Development Services Department and the Planning Department. Go ahead and hit the next arrow, please. So just a little bit of background. The Bendon Adams report is actually the byproduct of about 2 years of work. Starting in 2016, the municipality participated with Capitolite Housing with AEDC in a Kresge Foundation funded initiative called Drawing on Detroit. Drawing on Detroit was basically an opportunity for communities across the country to learn from what Detroit had been doing for the past 3 or 4 years as they came out of their bankruptcy and began to turn around that community. Next slide, please. The result of that was a funding opportunity from Kresge that we matched with some dollars of our own, and Cook Inlet did as well. We put out a competitive RFP nationally. We had many proposers on this and ended up selecting Bendon Adams out of Aspen, Colorado, I believe, as the proposer. One reason that we selected Bendon Adams, just as a way of background, is that the two principals in that company, Chris Bendon and Sarah Adams, they come from this world. Chris Bendon was a former director of community development in various Colorado communities. Sarah as well in Minneapolis and a few other cities. So they really understand the system, and they are process improvement consultants who really have the background of community development. So the Bendon Adams work covered a summer in 2017, probably about 2 months total, but there were 2 weeks of intense workshops, both with internal and external stakeholders. And the genesis of the Bendon Adams approach is you have to understand both how your customers feel, but also how your staff and internal departments feel about the processes you use if you really want to make positive change and get engagement from your internal groups. So we went through that. It was a large planning exercise. It was very eye-opening in many ways because we found internal engagement from places and people that we didn't expect, which was really rewarding. And the community, the private sector participants really found a lot of value in this. So the report was finalized in September of 2017. This is essentially my work plan during my time here at the city. We've made a lot of progress in the first year and a half. Next slide, please. And we're going to talk about it today, starting with Bob, if you don't mind.
Hi, I'm Bob Dole. I'm the new building official, for those of you I haven't met. Bendon Adams is great. It gave a map to go forward. What Michelle and I bring to that is we apply executive principles and management direction in terms of how you take that way forward and actually make it work with people, both internal and external, and with the systems we have. The big thing we talk about is first you start looking strategically. Start with why as an example of that. Why do we have the Development Services Department? Why do we have a Planning Department? What are we doing for the municipality of Anchorage to make sure we have the best place to live in the world? And then we take that down to a more tactical or operational level with the Checklist Manifesto, it being an example where you take those ideas and what do you need to do to take those broad ideas and make it into concrete steps going down. And that's what Michelle and I bring to this. Next slide, please. The Bendon Adams report, you have an extract of the first part here. It basically broke down our two departments and a collaborative effort between us in the different areas to do things. There's over 100 pages of survey results and discussion. The long and short of it, though, in that roadmap it provides is what we should be doing now, what we need to start doing within 90 days, and what should happen within a year. As you know, it came out in 2017. They didn't wait for hiring a building official to go out and take care of this. They moved out on their own and made a lot of progress. And so when you see areas done there, particularly by the building official, the Development Services Department, that's a tribute to Jeff, Frost, and Ross, who were doing things, and Michelle's efforts along the way as well, and Chris's. So it isn't like all this happened in the last month. It just moved forward. Next slide, please.
I would say the same for the planning department. As I've been here for a year, but a lot of this stuff was already actively engaging due to the efforts of the planning staff and Dave Whitfield and Carol Long and Craig London. So within right away for the planning department, there were a few items identified to be done, and they were completed. Some of the items of note for this group is really reviewing the process for implementation of long-range plans. So how do we implement the plans? What are we doing to actually get those action items moved forward? And that directly relates to the quarterly code amendment meetings, which not only are happening, but are happening on a bi-weekly.
Hello, Suzanne?
Hi, Chris. Yes.
All right.
That's Suzanne
Thank
LaFrance
you.
for the record. Thanks.
But better than just doing it on a quarterly code amendment cycle, we're actually doing bi-weekly meetings. As we are moving forward with different projects, we're finding that there's different interpretations, different issues that come with different codes. So how do we revise those? How do we work on improving just applicability? And then also have various efforts working with various people in the industry. So we have a monthly meeting with a large group of the Anchorage Home Builders Association, and then the planning department actually has a bi-weekly meeting with them to go over project-specific or issue-specifics that relate to the planning world. And then also attending the Live Work Play organization, and then having lunch and learns, and we'll talk about that more with the work plan, which is in the last slide, but you can move to the next. So then within the first 90 days, these were kind of the items that were identified that should happen. They've all been completed. We've revised our pre-application process. We now have a fee that's charged as well as a form. What that does is it's letting the applicant know what do we expect, and then it's also getting that information ahead of time so that the reviewing agencies feel that they actually are getting the information they need to come to the table prepared. So we're seeing that it's encouraging more participation, more actual coming to the meetings, and then as part of that, we are also providing meeting notes with that so that everybody can have a documentation of what was discussed. We've held, in 2018, we had held 2 project charrettes on real projects, so the Alaska Native Heritage Site and the Archive Site. We worked with those project teams. We had the whole entire planning department, private development, traffic also attended, so that the team, the MOE team could actually be part of development from the ground up so that they could see some of the challenges and the various perspectives that the developers look at when they're looking at a piece of property. But it also let those teams understand the perspective from the municipal side of things. And I think that's allowed for a lot of really rich conversation. For the archive site, it's actually, we're working with that team to improve our R4A district, because that's going to be zoned to that property. So we're actually having the opportunity to use that charrette and that involvement to understand how can we make this a more desirable zoning district. And then as part of the R2 amendment project that we've done, there was an extreme amount of project testing done by the planning department and land use review. So Bob and Jack let us borrow some of their zoning reviewers for a pretty extensive period of time. And we worked through all of Title 21 and got the developments made with the proposed changes that we were doing. And it was a really good effort. It really allowed the planning department and the zoning reviewers to see what it's like to work through Title 21 and actually get the project happen. And then it's allowed us to have some pretty insightful conversation with the Home Builders Association on that. And then, can you go back to that?
Sorry.
No, that's okay. And that just gets, and then all of that kind of leads to that, getting that regular feedback, which is an ongoing thing that we're.
So just a question, so on these charrettes, is this, who comes as a charrette?
So with it could be, in these instances, it was a consultant. Both of these were HLB projects, so it was a little bit easier. So the HLB landowner, their consultant team, and then those instances, it was not only their planner, but they had a traffic planner that also showed up. And then from the municipality, we had long-range and current planning people, as well as transportation, so all three of the divisions, as well as traffic, and then members from private development. I think we
Okay,
invited,
but it wasn't developers or people who had been on the project so much, it was just internal staff, municipal
well,
staff.
no, but yes, but it was also their design team it was our municipal staff in combination with the design team, so they're consultants. But not an actual developer, because they're not that stage yet.
Okay.
So next slide. And then within a year, I think we've already done all of these as well. One of the things that we're in the process of doing is just continually assessing the level of design requirements for applications. It's not a codified requirement, and we do that intentionally. Some applications require less of a design level. Some are more complicated. We want more information. So we're working, but understanding that predictability is important. We are working on some flyers or how-tos to make it more clear of what information we do want to see in our applications. And then making sure that we get our staff reports done about 1 week prior to the public hearing, so that the applicant has a chance to review what are those findings, what are those proposed conditions of approval prior to the public hearing. So if there's any questions or conversation that they need to have with planning staff, they can have that prior to going to the public hearing. Staff training is just something that we're continuing doing, whether it's through going through conferences, internal development, mentorship, and then looking for ways, of course, to help with the Assembly's policy development, which seems to be really helping by having staff be kind of subject matter experts. So we have Ryan, who does the marijuana, we have marijuana ordinances, not marijuana, and then we have Francis, who does a lot of our alcohol applications, and so we feel that that's been a resource, hopefully, to the Assembly, but we would ask for any feedback that you have on how we can help. Next slide. And then this is our 2019 work plan summary, so that kind of goes back to the whole thing of identifying how do we implement the 2040 plan, what are the high priority amendments that need to move forward to get some of our bigger items. These are the high level ones. We also have the omnibus, probably quarterly amendments that will be coming as we work on projects. I know Dave's group has a one coming soon on landscaping and some other things, just some cleanup items. But these are the big things that we're working on. Thing to note about all of this is that each of these are involving not just the planning department, but a huge effort of working with the development community, again through those meetings that I described earlier with AHBA, Live, Work, Play, and Lunch and Learns, and making sure that we're bringing them in at the very beginning so that they're not just seeing these proposed amendments after we've drafted them and gotten too far, that it seems harder to kind of just shift the wheel when we have to. So in summary, from the planning perspective, it seems that the Ben and Adam report has been really helpful, and just a reminder that reevaluating on a regular basis is really important. We need to keep doing that. And it's improved communication between the planning department and zoning review, which has been huge, and then also the planning department in the private sector. And then it's also been the impetus for some really good cross-departmental pollination. So we have a lot more involvement in teaming with long-range planning specialists with our current planning specialists, so that they're both understanding that when we write code, these are the real-life challenges. And then from an implementation standpoint, what is the goal, the long-range goal that's being applied there that we're trying to implement. So that's the end of the planning summary.
Any questions? You know, a little bit jumps out. I don't want to take too much time, but you know, it seemed to me. I mean, in the planning department, you all work side by side, and you're saying the long range from the current planning, they weren't communicating. Is there prior? You know, and now they are more.
Priorly, yeah. Previously, there was some silo work going on, not intentional. I think that everybody just got in their workloads, and now that I think I think a lot of it had to do with just the large effort of the 2040 plan. So they went in from the effort. Long range was ahead of the Title 21 rewrite. So they went into kind of having that long effort, jumping right into the 2040 plan. And I think that just having their nose to the grindstone, they didn't have the opportunity to really come to the counter or do things with the current planning and vice versa. So now that that's kind of been lifted, they've had the opportunity to, I think, just engage more in those conversations and become more communicative.
Because you'd like to see something that institutionalizes it, so when you're gone, you know, doesn't depend on you too, so that the next.
That's being done. I mean, that was an internal thing that was happening even prior to me getting here, and it's something that I think I fostered, but I didn't start. And I think that we will continue to see those as we break down the walls. And I think some of our newer staff, I don't even know if they see it as the divisions anymore. And that's what we're trying to do. Is we're a planning department. We have specialists that deal in transportation planning, long-range planning, current planning, but it takes all three to really make our planning efforts move forward.
That's the assumption from the outside. And here there's a split, was it usual?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Okay, so on the first one, I'm here, so obviously we filled it. In terms of increasing means to gather feedback, you've long been able to submit an online comment through our webpage about the department, or we have the comment box up front. I've started reaching out to groups like AHBA and AGC also directly saying, hey, let us know what's working, what's not working, and will give us a chance to address it. In terms of reducing turnaround time, we've been looking at how we can sequence that with our current processes. Structural review is our longest time for turnaround time, so we do simultaneous processing. That is, if you turn in a plan, we will give you the feedback from plumbing, electrical, mechanical, while we're waiting for structural, so you can address those before you get structural. We've done to reduce the turnaround time. We've also gotten far more deliberate in terms of getting after when we identify a lag where somebody's taking too long internally addressing it. Uninterruptible work. If you called right now before 10 o'clock asking to talk to a plan reviewer, we would be politely referred to their voicemail. 8 to 10 is our uninterruptible work time for our plan reviewers. The one exception to that is zoning review. Frankly, the demand signal was too great from usually homeowners coming in before work is the only time they could come in before 9 o'clock that they just had to talk to someone. So we, half of our zone review staff is a force of two. It has uninterruptible work on a given day. The other person's at the counter. The unintended consequence of that is it nails planning, because frequently the zone reviewers then have to contact Michelle's staff to follow up. So that's a work in process. We have comprehensive submittal checklist for just about every sort of permit or contractor application you could want to find. They are identified in our policies if you go to our website. The challenge is finding those, frankly, before you come in. One of the things we're looking at is a website refresh, so that if you're a first-time filer, you can more easily find what you need for a given type of permit. For walkthrough applications, realize now today, for your simple applications like a re-roof, you can drop it off, you can email it, you can fax it. So you don't even have to come here to walk it through. You can send it to us and come pick it up in a day or two and go forward. So we've addressed that part to move things along. Inspect-alongs. Inspect-alongs are like I'm doing this afternoon where I'm going out with an electrical inspector. That is key to feedback because I hear right from the GC on site what's working and not in our inspection programs. I get that immediate feedback. It also gives me a greater understanding of things like the deferred submission policy, what works and what doesn't. I'm not the only one that goes on those inspect-alongs. Michelle is scheduled to go on one next week. The mayor is scheduled the week after that. So throughout the enterprise, we've implemented this to get a better understanding from the consumer standpoint of how our inspection program works, what's value added, what's maddening on it, so we can go forward. In terms of review comments, we've gone to kind of a new protocol. One of the challenges I had coming when I came here was some of the comments you would get on a plan review were not value added to going forward to getting approval. If we could go to the next slide, please. Being a military person, there had to be an acronym involved, so I used IRAC, Issue, Rule, Application, Conclusion. When my staff puts a comment on a plan, this is what their requirements are. They have to identify what's the issue, why it's an issue, how they're applying the code to end up with that, and then what's necessary to be met to comply with the requirement of the code. Not how to do that, that's what people hire engineers and architects for, but what the requirement that is to be met. I provide feedback to employees when I see something that I don't believe meets those requirements. I've also invited many of our regular customers to provide me feedback of particularly useful and particularly less than useful comments, and we use those for staff development and training in terms of what's necessary to get it done. Because the worst thing is to get a plan review back with a comment that can't be intelligently answered because it's not an intelligent comment. That doesn't do anyone any good, so we moved out to address that. Next slide, please. In terms of 90 days, yes, the building official and the development services director are one and the same on both here. We've talked about increasing those means of outreach to gather feedback. Also for reducing turnaround time, I talked before about how structural was our longest pole in the tent. In order to make that part more responsive, we've extended an offer to another structural reviewer with extensive experience if this individual accepts. But we believe that will reduce the turnaround time into what is our greatest challenge in that area. Next slide, please. So the start doing within a year, there's already a contingency contract in place. So if we get backed up in plan reviews, we have a means to go to a very reputable, very established private sector company to make those happen. We're identifying now where we need better IT solutions. I talked about refreshing our web page, making the information on it more accessible. I'd like to go to an electronic sign-in like you see at Division of Motor Vehicles where you come up front so you can click what sort of permit you're requiring, and that will kind of get you a running head start on the things you need to go forward. You're going to see a lot more increased outreach from us. Ross is right now drafting about 3 different articles for 3 different publications who want to better understand what the plan review process is. We're also just at the request of the Korean community, we're specifically developing something for Korean business owners on what to look for earthquake damage. That's underway. Lean is how you streamline your processes, make them more effective, and we're taking the lessons learned in the after-action reviews that community development is doing as a whole to start laying out how we're going to do those actual exercises of where those processes line up and where we have opportunity to adjust things. Longer term, a big area I want to look at is the front counter end, and how when you come in to turn in a permit or an application, how we can better provide one-stop expedited shopping for you, how we can make sure our staff has the right skill sets to look beyond the checklist they have to spot any immediate issues, and how we can better become possibly concierges or champions to drive through the process rather than saying, okay, these are the folks you need to go deal with, go find them in this building. And we got to find a better way to do that we can just be more driving, getting the process through. So within the development services / building official side, that's kind of where we are to this point. After this, Michelle and I will transition together to organizational management, pending your questions.
Did you, any questions on that? You know, on the contingency contract for plan review, so what would be the trigger to bring these people on? If you have like a term contract with someone, you say, okay, we're getting a backlog, then you call them up.
Usually where we have exercised this contingency contract is when we have encountered a large complex project that we knew was going to disproportionately pull off the plan review team. It has the same capability though. If we get a demand signal from the community that structural reviews are just taking too long, we could potentially use it as a safety valve at that point. But we do have that in place now.
Would that be structural mostly?
No, they can do the full suite, but structural is where we don't have the internal capacity. If we outsource a plan review, we're going to have to outsource the whole thing. You can't the company's going to want to own the whole thing, not just pieces of it.
So you're doing like ACR and Dow, or you have like individual?
No, it is a set company. It's a larger company of a few hundred folks down in Seattle.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Chris?
Yeah, thanks. You mentioned that you were seeking input for building these processes, and you mentioned internally, and you also mentioned working with the general contractors.
Yes.
What kind of feedback are you hearing from them? What are they asking for?
So one of the contractors I dealt with extensively is talking about E-plans and the challenge of having both paper, where some vendors use paper and others use electronic, and how you merge those two as an example on the technology end. Largely what they want, though, is a more clear sense. They want to understand where it is flowing in the process and be assured somebody is driving their permit or their application to completion, that it isn't just that there's momentum, that somebody's trying to push that thing to get it through rather than it isn't just loitering along the way.
So that's the idea of the concierge.
That's where the concierge would step in. If you look at our process now, we can identify, particularly with the E-plans, who's had something under review for how long. We have means to flag it now. The concierge, though, is the person who would more be the one actually watching that data as a very deliberate thing. It's almost like an ownership of that internal test.
Just quickly then, if you don't mind.
Okay.
So is that really just the general area they're asking for, or are they asking for more streamlined, less steps along the way? I mean, I imagine they have a whole slate of interests.
Well, there's a whole slate of different contractors with a whole slate of different interests, so I'm nervous to generalize too much. I think the biggest thing is they would like it, they always want faster. And I respect
yeah,
it.
and you mentioned the Association of General Contractors. So what you really mean is members of the Association of General Contractors.
Right, but I've also, in speaking to AGC, I've spoken directly with their leadership, we're getting questions directly with them. Alternate means is meeting compliance is another area that's a recurring issue that comes up, and I've been working with a couple of their members on those issues. I think we've got some pretty satisfactory approaches that meet our code compliance, that there needs to find a way forward that's cost effective.
And alternate means what?
Alternate means is different ways of meeting a code requirement. Roof trusses is one that many in this room are familiar with. You need a roof truss has to be structurally sound so the roof stays on the building. You also has to provide for ventilation. There's different ways you can skin that cat. And showing that there's not one way fits all, but as long as you can demonstrate that your means is structurally sound and meets the ventilation requirements and the strength requirements, there's no reason we should get in your way. Another area is in seismic testing for an area. Land has to have a certain stability, or you have to increase proportionally foundations.
Right.
As long as they can show a basis to go forward, we're happy to work with them on alternate means.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Mr. Bolton, the concierge, that like additional positions, new positions, or is that a duties?
I see that as taking the existing workforce and relooking at our position descriptions and how we define the roles and duties.
So do you assign your current staffing?
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I have cough. It's like a duty you assign to current staff.
Yes, it'd be a duty assigned to current staff. I would be careful though to emphasize, I don't see it as an additional duty as much as reshaping their current duties as permit technicians. So it's not like we're going to take someone who's at 100% capacity and say do 20% more and do it just as well, but rather restructuring how we're handling it internally.
Just first, could a budget revisions have any impact on this? I know there's going to be reductions across the board. Have you looked at what it means for you people-wise?
Through the chair, Assemblyman Trainee, the short answer is for this discussion, it will not. We're not looking at taking reductions in this area.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, moving along to. Okay, the.
You go back one.
Thank you. Thanks. So what we look at the organization management process is something both Michelle and I are doing is renewing the discussion of our mission and vision. That is, why are we here? What are we supposed to be doing for the residents of Anchorage? And that's that important part to start looking at. Everything should start with why. And if you're not starting with there, but you're caught down to how you're doing stuff, you may lose track of, do you even need to? Or why, or how should you? Looking at the staff physical arrangement, I talked about our website at times being difficult to navigate. If you've been in this building any amount of time, you know it has its challenges too. Michelle and I both have plans of the building, and we want to look at how we ended up here and what makes sense from a functional standpoint for folks to find their way around here. The cross-functional teams, at least when I got here, these meetings come up probably one or two a week when an issue arises. How are we going to sort out a way forward between planning and development services, the buildings and the building safety aspects going forward? Those are ongoing now to look at those conflicting policies and to figure out what we can address internally and what we need to go back to the assembly for to address those issues. And the technology applications, as I mentioned, is a work in progress. Another area we're visiting there is looking at some sort of biometric sign-off at the front counter so we can be quicker in getting our staff moving around. They have to run, grab a plan, and come back or something like that, so it doesn't take as long to log back on. Next slide. And jump in with I'm forgetting. So we talked before about you start with why, and from there you can better identify your priorities once you agree what your mission and vision is. As we renew our mission and vision to be proactive, not reactive, based on what we are doing for Anchorage, we believe the priorities will fall in place. We're developing our shopping list of hardware and software needs as we speak. And it's an ongoing better understanding across department roles. So many of the meetings I go to involves Michelle's staff, fire, traffic, PM&E. That it's kind of the regular ongoing role as I've seen it here. But it's always an education of appreciating the different aspects and the different important authorities, different folks bring to these discussions and those roles that we have.
And to add to that, not only are we doing that, I think from just an internal policy standpoint, like even from our perspective of when we're writing ordinances, we're getting much better at bringing in all those departments to understand how our role touches their role to make sure that it's all in line with one another.
And the next slide, please. So we talked about the priorities. You're seeing that. Michelle and I, coming in from our backgrounds, are taking a very deliberate approach to staff development needs in terms of how we provide feedback, how we evaluate, how we train to make sure that they are doing the best possible job they can for the members of Anchorage. And leadership doesn't happen by accident. It's a conscious decision to, just like any other process there, and that's one of the things we're bringing on board here. I think also that empowerment of the employee that has the good idea. I'm all ears, Michelle's all ears. And you can see that we still have a couple works in progress that we still need to move out at. Next slide, please.
That's it. So just in summary, you've gotten a quick snapshot of actually about a year and a half of work. A lot of it is ongoing. it's tough to demonstrate progress and say done when you've accomplished something, but it's designed to be an ongoing, a regular occurrence. And so a lot of these are practices and policies that are being put into place that will live past any sort of report or any sort of even director, and are having, I think, tangible impact on the development process. There continues to be room to improve always, and a lot of that comes through this deliberate feedback loop that's been created both with customers and with the public, the non-customer, but the person who lives with the results. And I think that overall, by and large, we've been very impressed with the results, and both from the external perspective, but also from the internal perspective. When Ben and Adams came to town, they were very blunt because they understand this world very clearly, and they said to staff, we're here to help you do your job easier, faster, with less stress. And that, I think, is really ultimately part of the goal, is if we can minimize any sort of stress, both internal and external, I think we're getting closer to a smoother functioning position. So the Ben and Adams directions and the report remains, like I said, my #1 work plan for the next 3 years, 2.5 years. Thankfully, we've got extremely talented staff, both my managers and their teams. And I think we look forward to doing this again, perhaps on a biannual or quarterly basis.
Yeah, good. No, I think it is worthwhile. Any questions, family members? Anyone else? Okay, good. Thank you. All right, so we've got a couple other things on here. Sure. One is draft of on-site consumption, which is very early. And then we also have the old business draft of code changes, just to get us in sync. And we've already looked at that previous meetings. And I think it might even be on the agenda for introduction. Here, Dean would know.
3A.
Dean watching?
No.
3A.
Oh,
What's the status of 3A?
No, it's not yet, but we could submit by tomorrow for inclusion on the addendum. And also that we have actually 2 ordinances. One is general updates from the states, and the other is an update that we talked about at the last 2 meetings ago about twisting all the debts of
right.
application. There's a transfer and eliminating that. So we actually have 2 ordinances on that.
I think the debt is on our introduction for this.
No, it's the sale price ordinance.
Yeah.
Oh, that's the discount thing.
Discount.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
That'll be on the 9th.
So do we have any reason to rush these through? I mean, put it on addendum? Or
I
just
do
wait?
have a question that was asked about one of them that is germane to this.
Okay, so do you want to switch this for a moment to 3A?
Yeah, I had, if you don't mind,
Do we make a motion on that?
I don't think so.
Okay. So just for everybody, we're switching to 3A real quick. Should be agreed for discussion.
And so I had someone reach out to me with the question of why we didn't contemplate changing the signage requirements that the state allowed. They, in the state regs, now allow 1 standalone sign. And so,
I can
I'm
speak
sorry.
to that.
oh great, I wasn't here, I was out, I was sick, so.
Okay, Ryan?
Yeah, so for the on-site consumption ordinance, that would affect Title 21.
Well, we moved
Not
to
for the
3A
on-site
right now.
consumption.
We're on 3A.
Yeah. It's for
Correct,
the-
but this is about the signage.
Okay.
So we are going to include a amendment to Title 21 to make it in line with state code. in
Okay,
that
my
ordinance.
understanding is they're not quite, because last time I asked it, because we had this question, but they said, well, they hadn't quite approved that, so now they have approved allowing another sign that's not on the building.
So.
And so what I'm hearing you say is that that's a separate section of the code and it needs to go through its own process. Title
Right,
21.
it's
Okay.
going to kind of be lumped in as an omnibus Title
Good enough.
21 marijuana ordinance.
Answers my question, thank you.
And that's, so this on-site consumption has a lot of other stuff in it.
It will.
Looking at it. Okay, we might consider not doing that. Right. Do you expect much controversy on it? So now they can put signs on the building, but not separate, and we're proposing, because the state has done, they can have a sign set away from the building, right?
Correct.
And do you expect any pushback on that?
I tried to find, I looked back on old meetings and old meeting minutes, and listened to a few committee meetings to find out why that rule was put in place in the first place. And I think it was just due to bringing municipal regulations in line with current state regulations. I listened to the meeting where we enacted that rule, and there wasn't any public concern. It just seemed like it was something to bring it in line with state regulation.
Chris?
I think the concern that I have heard has come from the industry in that what they want is a fair and flat playing field, so that if one has to do it, we all have to do it. No sandwich board signs out there if you can't do them here, and just equity. And so that's important. But I think that at some point we should be, if the state's allowed it, contemplating the question of should we allow it. And so sooner than later, if it's moved through.
Okay. Okay, so on this, we have this coming forward. Do we, I'd rather not put something on the addendum if it's not a rush thing. Does anyone mind? So what's our next chance to introduce this?
Could be on the 16th.
So it would show up at the second meeting of April.
And is that the 16th? That's swearing in?
No, it's
No,
23rd.
No, you can't you introduce something at that meeting?
We normally don't.
Yeah, it's frowned upon.
Yeah.
Okay, so will it be ready to introduce these on the 18th?
Looked like it.
Looking at Dean.
18th, maybe 23rd. Yeah.
23rd?
Yeah. The 23rd.
23rd, I'm
That'll
sorry,
be the
yeah,
next meeting
yeah,
after
thanks.
16.
Okay, so I'd say we should just do that, and then so we see it in front of us, and then if there's some issues, we can bring it to this committee if necessary. Does that make sense? Okay, so shoot for having those introduced on the 23rd.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so moving back to 2B on on-site consumption of marijuana edibles. Dean, are you leading us through?
Yeah, I'll read this one today. So I think today's mostly our initial discussion on-site for the county. I don't think that this ordinance is in any shape ready to go. And there's a lot of pieces for us to consider. There's the secondhand smoking ordinance, new secondhand smoking state law, as well as new on-site regulations from the state. And when we implement that in our code, we kind of redefine those on-site and state regs for what fits in our licensing regulations in Chapter 1080 and what fits in Title 21, because there's certain provisions that are more relevant to land use and compatibility with surrounding uses. So with all of those kind of factors and aspects to consider, I don't want to rush it. So today is just our initial take. So we have a draft ordinance, and really I need to make a hat tip to Mandy Honest. She put this together. She did a great job. I had a little review. We had some comments from John. I think that let's see. We have a couple of handouts that I want to point to. So we've got the draft ordinance, and I'll go through, I guess, a few sections of that. But we also have a handout that says the dates at the top, and this is something that's our current code that we put together about public consumption of marijuana. Back when Bill Falsey was in the school of 20, put this together to inform the assembly public about what's our law about public consumption of marijuana at the time. And then we have another handout that's got these two columns to it. And this is a comparison of the secondhand smoking law that the state passed and municipalities' current secondhand smoking ordinance, and what the differences are. Mr. Jeff Hickman from the Anchorage Health Department put this together, and we really appreciate that. So, as I said, several moving parts to consider. So, jumping back to the draft ordinance, a whole bunch of changes in this 17-page ordinance are simply to add words, endorsement along with license. So, the state's got an state license and an endorsement for on-site consumption. They have some other endorsements that we haven't adopted at a local level, like endorsements for different types of cultivation and endorsements for different types of manufacturing processes. We didn't distinguish those, but it seems going forward we want to distinguish for retail marijuana establishments an endorsement for on-site consumption as well. So we've added a municipal license or endorsement in a whole bunch of places. So you see that throughout the main sections. I think I want to hit on page to 108026B, it was restored and now filled out with the application for a new Title 1 store license. If you want to get an endorsement, so basically a paragraph all about you can apply for an endorsement if you want to have on-site consumption. And then the other next main section I want to hit on is that page 5, top, is procedures for an application for transfer. So it's basically just saying if you're going to transfer your retail license, well, you can't transfer an endorsement for on-site consumption. Unless you're transferring the license to, they go together and get separate payment transfer. That's basically what that says. Top of page 5, a new paragraph 2. On page 6, there's about public hearings, and we added a paragraph about how we do a public hearing for an on-site endorsement application. So we've got a bunch of retail stores already out there, like ready to have on-site consumption. So now we expect new applications for on-site consumption. We want to have a public hearing on those endorsement applications. We know they already have a retail license.
Chris?
Is this language to ascertain the reaction of the public, standard language for public hearings, or is that a novel phrase?
I think that, well, we maybe kind of clean up some of that language a little bit. That's the first step.
And just to answer your question, yes, it's in existing code, 108071 it says that exactly.
That phrase, okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I do know there's a few places where there's some spelling errors and some grammar cleanups.
Yeah.
Like I said, first take. So the real need here, I think, that we're getting to is how is on-site consumption going to work? And on page 9, we've got a new section, 1080.306. Actually, I should point out that when we first enacted this whole chapter, we had reserved a section in 1080.305 about retail marijuana store privileges and A4 is reserved for on-site consumption. We knew that was coming someday, so we reserved that paragraph. Here it's deleted, but I suggest that we're going to instead say for on-site consumption must comply with new section 1080.306. So 1080.306 is our new section. So we had a meeting with Mandy, myself, the planning department, and some others to talk about what direction we want to go on site, how we work with implementing state regs. And this is, I guess, what we put together out of that meeting. We need to have a few more as we go through this language and present some comment again in the future, I imagine. So here, 1080.306 is a new section. It's not underlined, but all the language is new. Excuse me. So, A1, you have to have an endorsement, like to sell marijuana and marijuana products. I guess one of the big things to note here is a possible division between on-site consumption that's just that includes smoking or inhalation, and separating that out from other on-site consumption of edibles. I guess there's various other forms of non-smoking consumption. So that's a big issue that we want to get direction on. We want to separate those things out. And Mr. Wellington had several comments that he's inserted in places about how this is going to work. So, unless prohibited, this is an endorsement authorized to sell products, so for consumption on premises, certain limitations, A2 limitations that are reflected in the state regulations as well. So we pretty much try to track what the state's done, and should take it. Again, we can be more restrictive than the state regulations. We can't be less restrictive. So that's really the policy direction that we can get from these common meetings. Is it in some of these limitations? Do we want to be more restrictive? And that's something we could go for more policymakers. So subsection B is what a list of various things. One stroke, one-site consumption may not do. Some concentrate consumption on premises, that's not going to be allowed. The employees or agents consuming on premises. a lot of these I think are common sense. One that's interesting is not allowing the person to consume tobacco or tobacco products. And yes, like Mr. Wood pointed out, well, that's interesting because smoking tobacco, smoking marijuana, why should there be a difference?
Can I answer that? You can smoke tobacco outside. You can smoke a cigarette walking down the street. That's the fundamental reason we're doing on-site consumption. One of the reasons is because you can't smoke it outside. So I like preventing tobacco products when you smoke.
So, question, is this from state law?
No.
That's not. No, I just questioned that.
Oh,
I said that. It just. I mean, I kind of guess
Yeah,
the environment
it's
is like a
exactly-
bar. You're sitting around, and we don't allow smoking in bars now. But if you're smoking marijuana, it's like you kind of broach that, you know.
Yeah, but again, it's. I think it's a. For me, it's the day we ban smoking tobacco outside, then I will take this additional step. But I think it makes sense to keep tobacco out of this environment.
And I would offer most institutions, if you talk to them that would be interested in this line of business, wouldn't invite cigarette smoking.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. Seems odd, but. All right, thanks.
And that paragraph 3 is exactly what that says in state regulation as well.
Well, this isn't state
Yeah.
regulation.
So.
Yeah, this B3 about tobacco, state regulation says the exactly same words.
Okay, something odd came out of you. Something odd came out of you.
Yes. See, so before bringing products from just elsewhere, purchasing products of that marijuana store for consumption, but selling and delivering at a different price than normally sold, and 6 limited amount, doing limited amount for such time. 7's I guess that's, or you have to sell it at the same price as everyone else for that day. So maybe we have a special offer. It's got to be for everybody who purchases and brings it out, or purchases and consumes on site. And 8, that's kind of similar to legal, I guess, regulations, there were sales regulations about organized games, contests. And then advertising, no advertising prohibited practices, some common sense regs and so. So C on page 10 at line 49, I think that a lot of these provisions might fit better on Title 21, and that's a discussion we'll have with planning and Mr. Yali as we go forward. So all the way down to
Question, Dean?
whatever all C, you might move to Title 21. It's more about how the area is situated, relationship surrounding properties.
The Title 21 issues, these will go before planning and zoning?
Yeah, through the chair, yeah. And we're working on a slightly different timeline on the Title 21 provisions for on-site consumption, and you'll see those maybe at the next CEDC meeting.
So there will be robust opportunity at multiple levels for public input.
Robust.
This would be unusual for us to send a marijuana issue through planning and zoning.
Title 21.
The Title 21 provisions should go through planning and zoning. And that's the root of the question that Dean, I guess the group is asking the CEDC is, they're contained within the state regulations together, the licensing and the sort of the land use questions. What I think Dean's recommending and we concur is those more appropriately should be in Title 21 because they're land use specific criteria. So that's why they're highlighted, and that was one of the big policy questions for today is, are you comfortable with pulling those out? We certainly recommend it.
Has the Planning Commission looked at any Title 21 issues related to marijuana in this process at all?
The only time that Planning and Zoning Commission has reviewed a marijuana AO was in the very initial stages in like 2015, 2016. But once we had regulations up and running, it's just been this committee in the Direct Assembly that's been reviewing those.
You know, our general policy is to try to keep sort of like regulations together, right? So if you're if you're a marijuana purveyor and you're deciding you wanted to set this up, you would go down here And then, if we were to pull this, there must be some reference there to send them there, right? Or would we just duplicate? I mean, something to let this person know. I mean, honestly, these are pretty sophisticated businesses that hire attorneys, but still, we don't want someone to miss something in a totally different chapter of code, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Chris?
Yeah, I think though that if you, and I am fully in support of figuring this out, but the land use issues that these rules were sent to initially were to help set a framework that had broad public support. And we are, in essence, initiating an entire new process. And so, in my opinion, there's strong argument to have their eyes on this, because they were there when we talked about the licensing for the commercial and the retail. And that's an important step for public input. And so I would strongly recommend that we consider allowing that level of public input and review to polish off some of the broken corners that might come out of the public debate.
When you say they were there, you mean the planning commission?
Yeah, this
I don't
went to
believe they
them. They did.
Through the chair, in the initial days of setting up the Title 10 and Title 21 provisions around marijuana retail, after the state legalized, it did. And Assembly Member Constant nailed it. It's precisely because the licensing doesn't necessarily affect neighbors as much as the land use issues do. So it made sense that we should give people ample opportunity to look at those separately.
Good. Are they prepared for that?
They
Planning
will be.
commission's ready.
They will be.
Okay.
They will be.
Okay.
Is it about 60 days, I think, for planning and zoning commission review of an ordinance?
I'd have to look at the calendar, but if we had this ready to go, the case could be heard would be in July. Dave?
Yeah, July or August.
It'd be either the second meeting of July or the first meeting of August.
Which means that
You would get it a month later, most likely.
Missed the summer.
Yeah, it would mean that the marijuana purveyors would miss the summer, which,
But getting it right is better than getting it fast.
well, isn't that why, and I don't know if we want to have a separate discussion about this, Mr. Weddleton, but there's this full-on version where we talk about smoking that implicates ventilation and a bunch of other things. I think there's also a proposal to have a on-site consumption of edibles. Is there an ordinance for that as well, a draft ordinance for that as well? And the thinking would be, I certainly don't want that to derail this larger discussion, but I also am sympathetic to the idea that we have a large tourist season in the summer, and they might want something in place for that.
Any thoughts, Peter?
Yeah, I can speak to that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, thank you, Dean et al. For putting this together. When I have been talking with Mr. Peterson, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, and we are of the same mind that it might be beneficial to bifurcate this issue, to deal with edibles first, and then the smoking and inhalation issues separately. And that's sort of for two reasons. First, if it's at all tenable to allow business to benefit from this during the summer. And then second, I think smoking would require much more dialogue with the community, and definitely won't be done by the summer. So I don't know, within the processes that we have lined up, Mr. Schutte, if we can do edibles and make that work for this summer season or not.
Through the chair, yeah. So I'd say 99% of the licensing ordinance in front of you is lifted exactly verbatim from the state regulations. So, keeping in mind that the state regulations still will impose building requirements on retail establishments who just want to do edible places, edible zones. That still exists. I think it would be we could do it. It would be a little bit duct tape and blue tarpy, but we could do it. We could bifurcate both and get it out. Now, I think realistically speaking, even if we took that approach and this went before the body and was adopted, let's say middle of May at the latest, many of those building design requirements that exist in state regulations would still be there. My gut feeling is that it would be really hard for marijuana retailers to create their new edible consumption zone areas, whatever you want to call it, in time for the summer season. But if this is the direction from the body, we're certainly willing to try.
Mr. Wildman?
Yeah, I think Chris first.
Thanks. And so I am happy to support that process. My only consideration would be that we don't bifurcate and delay.
Yeah.
Part two, it's that both parts work fast forward, regular process, so that we don't drop a ball along the way. But I think it's reasonable to contemplate, and I don't mind duct taping, blue tarps, as long as we're protecting the public and ensuring that the businesses have fair opportunity.
Of course.
Yeah, duct tape and blue tarps is the Alaskan way. I would like to hear, and I don't know what your thought is for this hearing. We still have almost half hour. Can we hear from members of industry about that idea?
Yeah, let's, yeah, definitely. I'd like to, let's make sure we kind of go around here, and then I think we.
I mean, before we go much further down, there's a lot of granular technical things I think we want to talk about, but I want to hear about this broad idea of, if we were to get a on-site consumption of edibles ordinance going forward, and let's say we pass it by, like you said, mid-May, are there any retailers that think they could realistically build out before, say, August or September?
No, I think it's for today's purpose on this, we should figure out these bigger issues and not the minutia.
Yeah.
And I think the issues are, do we separate edible from smoking? And then also, I think we have some changes here that aren't related to on-site consumption, and maybe pull those out. Maybe put those into the stuff that's in our 3B, which is kind of an omnibus change. But get those issues away from these fairly controversial. So split it basically in possibly in thirds. So that was, we go Ryan first. Okay, Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just kind of wondering, maybe this would just be a simpler way to address this rather than kind of having two separate ordinances. But if we went forward with something very similar to the proposed language before you, but added a provision in there that consumption by inhalation is prohibited, that would get rid of the smoking issue but allow for edibles. And then down the line, if you were to figure out the minutia of the anti-smoking laws so that you could carve out some type of exemption for marijuana consumption, then it would just be a simple deletion of that line in code.
But we still need to avoid going to planning and zoning.
But through the chair, that can still be accomplished. I think what he's suggesting, and it's certainly a good way to go, is deal with all of the all of the licensing changes, including the segments that deal with on-site smoking consumption. Just add a line of code, probably in the very beginning, that basically says all of the sections of this code that speak about on-site smoking consumption are not applicable in Anchorage until such time.
Smoking. Smoking percent, to be clear. So let me go to Dick. Okay.
Just want to make sure we include the Federation of Community Councils way to get this message out to the public. Because in the summertime, they take a hiatus, some of them do. So make sure we get somebody in the Federation here to get this message out to community councils. I know he's back there, but I don't want them left out of this process.
Okay, good. Who is next?
I just want to quick follow on Mr. Schutte and Ryan. I would hope we don't use the word prohibited. What he said was a better use of terminology that is not allowable at this time, or some other term, but I don't want us to predispose prohibition into our code, even if it is just temporary at this time. And so the whole idea of this movement towards legalization is to get rid of prohibition as a framework. And so I just want us to be careful how we choose the language. If we are to go that way, that first section is not to say is prohibited, but instead, I think what you said was a better term. We might play it back to capture those words, but I'm sure it was brilliant.
Okay, so
I think it was.
So we kind of have a proposal then is break out anything that's not related to edible, put that perhaps into the thing that we'll introduce on the 23rd, and then. Is that acceptable then to say, go ahead and write this as it is, but just have a phrase there, smoking not yet, or something like that? Is that, should we go forward that way?
In my opinion, I think that'd be a cleaner way to go forward. That way, there's no conflict between our regs and state regs. Everything's there. It's just it's one more.
Oh, I got you. So we parallel state regs and we break that piece out. So then the next question is, do we go to Planning and Zoning Commission? Because even with just edibles, there are kind of land use issues. You have people getting stoned and then driving away, in a neighborhood or area. So that is a land use issue.
That's a criminal code issue.
But it's also a neighborhood issue. draw
Yeah.
people for a different use.
Through the chair, I mean, I don't think we're going to be able to avoid, I personally don't think we're going to be able to avoid or should avoid planning and zoning, even if we're just dealing with edibles. The state regulations spell out consumption rooms and consumption spaces broadly, generically. So it does not bifurcate between smoking spaces versus just consumption spaces. So there's a lot of, and Jeff was whispering in my ear to this point, there's a lot of requirements still in state regs about the consumption spaces that ultimately, I mean, really are kind of land use and zoning questions. And it goes back to my other premise, which is I don't think that people could realistically meet the state regulations in the next 2 months.
So if it goes through the planning commission, we're not, why split them up then, really?
Well, just let me finish that thought. The state regulations treat the consumption area generically. So it doesn't matter if we allow only edibles or both, the room is essentially the same. There's one or two areas where we think we might be able to peel back some of the layers, maybe around the ventilation, even though that's in the state regs. If we're already arbitrarily stating that smoking is not allowed, we can leave that out of this initial Title 21 discussion and come back later, but it's up to you guys.
Well, we don't have to be fully guided by the state regs in this because we're I think the only, or one of the only municipalities or places in the state that has layered our own set of regulations on top of them, right? So again, I think there's a critical piece of information here that will determine whether or not I want to do this. And it is from the industry. If we were to pass an ordinance in mid-May and not go to the planning commission, could they have something, pretty bare bones, edible consumption facilities built by the end of the summer? If not, then it doesn't matter. Then we can keep it together, planning and zoning. But if so, then we have yet again gone through another tourist season with no legal place for tourists to consume these goods. So I would like to hear from industry.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure we add Health and Human Services to this question. You deal with edibles, we got to make sure the public's protected. Health and Human Services, we got to make sure the kids don't get just baggage they can open wherever. Want to make sure we've got those safeguards put in edibles. I don't care if the state does, since they've been co-opted by the industry anyway.
Just a quick follow-up on that. So, I mean, is that a given then, if there's edibles, that we have Department of Health is involved?
Absolutely.
Kids aren't allowed.
What do you call them?
Anchorage Health Department.
I'm sorry.
Sorry. We permit every retail store in Anchorage, and the state DEC permits all cultivators and growers, so manufacturers.
So were there edible places, on-site edibles or whatever? You have a routine that would cover?
We would have to be involved with the enforcement of the retail shop. But that would be, right now we're looking at all prepackaged stuff and it's pretty simple. So it just adds another layer for us to deal with it. I don't think it's too horrible, but that's kind of what we're looking at, the food stuff and making sure they're packaged the way they're supposed to be. If they're not, then we have to let AMCO know. So they regulate that stuff more than we do.
And are those code changes that come to the assembly or just policy?
No, that's we're currently doing our permitting under the Anchorage Food Code 1660. So, which is about the only place we have to do it. Someday we might want to do a section for marijuana specifically, since FDA code doesn't deal with it very well. But we're kind of making it.
Okay, thank you. Is it Chris?
Yep. Thank you. There are two things. If we're going to contemplate asking the industry, their representatives are here. However, I think there's an opportunity in the short term, depending when our next meeting is, to have them go back to the Cannabis Business Association with a question of, are you prepared, if you look at these general draft regulations, to have a space that you could allow people to sit down? I've heard cup of coffee and a brownie kind of business. And so I think it would be better than just relying on one person here to have them communicate to us after they've communicated to the folks who are in the business, so that we have a very broad input about the feasibility from people who have the money to put on the table. So I think that's if we have 2 weeks till the next meeting, an opportunity for them to call a meeting and get the question on the table.
Forrest?
No.
Yes, sir. We do have a meeting scheduled for next week.
Next week. Oh, that's enough time, I'm sure.
But nothing on the agenda, so if that, I mean, we could pick this up again then, especially if you want to fast track something, that might make sense. And go ahead and just focus on this and that one. Is that, were we to meet on this again on a week from today?
But again, there's a piece of information, if we could just hear from a couple of people, if the answer is no, we can't do this, then we don't need a meeting next week.
That's probably true. Okay, so should we go ahead and have comments from audience? Or you want to do audience participation now? Or
I want to ask a specific question
Go
of
ahead.
the industry.
Okay.
I don't know if anyone's willing to answer this. Maybe you, Jana, or anyone else.
I mean, I represent 70% of businesses here in Anchorage, so yes, I will be happy to answer.
So my question is, if we were to bifurcate and get an on-site consumption, an edible consumption ordinance passed by, say, mid-May, would any of the businesses realistically be able to comply with the sort of building code requirements and everything, get something set up by the end of the summer?
So there's several businesses that have been actually working towards this, because if you remember, this carve out in the no smoking bill was months ago. So there's several businesses that have already been kind of, okay, this is what I'm gonna need. I'm gonna at least need a standalone building. Okay, I need that. I'm gonna need a separation. I'm gonna need to carve out some space. So I think there'll be a couple businesses ready to do that in May, or at least trying to. Definitely going for it and wanting to provide that on-site consumption space.
Just to follow up on that, have they applied through the state yet?
No, because the rules aren't even in effect until April 11th. So there actually is no way to apply until April 11th.
But you understand that if we take these portions and we go to planning and zoning, then there's no way you'll get an opportunity to do it this summer. I mean, it's just the time frame will push it at least to August.
Yeah, we wouldn't want that. We would like to bifurcate something and go to the assembly for at least edibles.
Mr. Chair, I actually don't know that even if something passes in May, that you're going to have the opportunity, because almost every building is going to need construction, and there's a whole permit process, review process, getting everything on the ground in a proper legal way. And so while I'm not opposed to trying, I think it's irrational, practically speaking, to think before August, if it's approved in May, that the department will have set of protocols, go through an application process, then actually get the construction built and open the doors. And so I think that we can try to that goal, but I don't want us to kid ourselves to think that because we pass an ordinance, all of the mechanisms are in place to make that function in May. You know, we just don't operate a city that allows people to throw up buildings overnight.
Well, that's exactly the question I'm asking of industry. Do you think you could get anything built?
You don't have to build a new building, you just build a separation in your existing building. It doesn't need to be a new building. In fact, it couldn't be a new building, it's going to be a new licensed premises, and you have to go and start all over again from very ground floor. And to Mr. Train's comments before, the edible limits here are really 2 servings at a time, so 5 milligram servings, and they have to be consumed on site. If they're not consumed on site, they have to go and be resealed so they're child resistant when they leave the facility.
Thank you.
Just a follow-up comment to that. Jana, one of the issues that we've struggled with on the licensing and Title 21 side in the state regulations is that it's very specific about the consumption spaces needing to be in a freestanding building, and they reference a definition of freestanding that is not what you described. It is literally a new building.
No, so you have to understand, the cannabis operations have to be in a freestanding building. It's not that the consumption area in and of itself is a freestanding building.
So the definition that I'm reading right now, and that'd be great, because that would resolve a lot of this, is freestanding means a building not supported by another structure and does not share ventilation or internal airspace with an adjoining structure.
Right. So it's within that single standalone building, you create a separation for on-site consumption. The idea wasn't to create an entirely separate building just for on-site consumption, because they're supposed to be in the same license premises.
I think we agree with you conceptually. We're struggling with the
Then
law.
what do you think? Because you're from the state, so.
Yeah, I mean, that's,
That was the
I think
intent.
there's a lot we just don't know about what this is going to look like. I think the intention was that the applicants were going to come from already existing structures, not that they were going to be building brand new structures, but that may happen too. And if they need to do that to comply with this regulation, they need to do that. The application forms won't be ready until April the 11th when this becomes effective. and the deadline for the May board meeting is April the 12th. So if someone can turn this around in a matter of about 18 hours, then the board may review it at the May board meeting. Otherwise, the next marijuana control board meeting isn't scheduled until July.
But the board could.
They could have a special meeting.
Yeah, they could have a special meeting, which they've done selected those times.
But that's a whole other food, yeah.
John, there's one tobacco place that actually did that, the on-site tobacco consumption. Couldn't they simply switch to marijuana for that?
I have an answer to that. I've been investigating a little bit on that question, and what I've been informed is that they don't smoke. Yeah, thank you. I didn't see the air quotes there, recording. The smoke shop isn't in the smoke shop. The smoke shop sells the tobacco, and they apparently have a gentleman's club operation next door, which allows the smoking, but that's not allowable under the marijuana licensing code. And so that's
There's a way around it for them.
yeah, a club.
Okay, so.
But
Mr.
I want
Dunbar's
can I
got
just
a
note that I think that was an important point, though. I think there was a hang up here in the interpretation of the ordinance or the state regulation. We've heard from someone who works at the state and the attorney most, kind of up on this stuff, that they did not intend a freestanding building. And I think that is also, there has been a public debate about this, and I think it was always assumed, whenever I've heard about it, that we were talking about partitioning off a portion of an existing building, not creating like little smoking huts. That was never really a, accessory smoking units. It was never something that we were going for.
Yeah, just then if that's the case, then the interpretation of freestanding might be for the whole licensed facility as opposed to.
We would agree conceptually that that's precisely what it should.
However,
how it should be
then
interpreted.
that might restrict some entities that are operating within a strip mall.
It would prohibit it.
Yeah, if they're one of several buildings in a condo setup of a commercial building, they couldn't, but then someone who has a freestanding building could. And so that way the neighbors don't get flooded. So that's an interesting interpretation. I look forward to maybe Dean or some legal minds giving us a path forward on the question of law there.
Mr. Chair, just real quick, what would be helpful from Janet, just get us a list of the applicants that you think are interested. We, in our internal working group, we tried to mentally imagine, many of the well-known establishments and whether or not they would fit the criteria. I have to admit, I don't know very many of them, but Dankridge is one that I honed in on to ask this question, is that truly a separate building? My recollection of Hobby Lobby is that that was a party wall between REI and where Dankridge is now. So that technically would not qualify. That's not a standalone building.
Yeah. It also means that none of the marijuana establishments in the downtown core would qualify, which is unfortunate because that's where the tourists.
One would.
Yeah, so
Maybe
you have
two.
to look at how those actually are, if they can take the walls away and still have it be their
Oh,
own
gotcha.
structural supporting wall. So there are some,
Right.
I don't know exactly which ones, I think it would take a
Well,
structural engineer.
Even Great Northern, it's a freestanding building. It's amazing.
Is it really?
Yeah, it's freestanding. All of those are freestanding. They're very unique old construction. It's like row houses in DC from the turn of the century.
Good.
Okay, so do you want to go around then and get some feedback from the audience? So I guess our direction is, so do we expect to meet next week then?
If there is a path forward to bifurcating, then I think we should.
Is there a path forward? So we should meet next week on stuff. What is the date? Next week, the 11th? Okay, the 11th.
And I would ask ACBA to host a meeting, get some input from folks who are interested.
Okay, and then, so, do you want to end this and call it audience participation, or keep this under 2B? We'll call it talking about 2B. Anybody here?
To be or not to be?
We'll just go down. Did you have any comments on it? Joel, Bob? Heather?
We're just talking about ethics, right?
Well, we're talking broadly on our agenda item 2B, and we'll meet again next week to kind of continue the conversation. Same time, same place.
Apologies, Emily, Univer, government relations representative, so she wasn't able to be here. I am qualified to speak on behalf of Secondhand Smoke, but not, ACSPM does not have a position on it.
Okay, so if we meet again next week, do you want to kind of flesh out maybe your bullet points on what the secondhand smoke issues would be? So we'd have all that stuff prepared for us.
At the next meeting.
Is that week quick, okay for you?
As far as
We dealt with this a year and a half ago. You can go check your notes.
Oh, yeah, we still have the same information. But
Okay.
yes, so the meeting will be, same time.
Same time, same place, but I'll be on time.
You think?
Yeah, sure. So I'm with the Department of Health and Social Services. I'm the marijuana education program manager. And in relation to edible consumption and smoke inhalation, I'm just really interested in what is the Newby's plan to track the public health and safety impacts, and if there's any indicators or data that you can be collecting now in order to measure changes over time. I'm thinking about traffic citations, pedestrian incidents involving marijuana. And I'm also interested in what sort of education or information that you're planning to require of retailers to share about marijuana laws in Alaska. The state, we've created some pamphlets that we use with a large proportion of the retailers across the state, just kind of around marijuana laws and thinking specifically about our driving laws.
Could you, in a week,
Yeah.
have kind of a little bullet points on what those
Yeah,
data we
I
might
can
collect
do
and
that.
so on?
Sure.
That'd be nice.
A lot of retailers carry that little booklet there. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I'm having to leave this here. We have them online. We have a bunch printed out in our office.
Yeah, that'd be very helpful. And your name again is?
Eliza Muse.
Excuse me?
Eliza Muse.
Eliza Muse, thank you. Sarah?
I would just confirm, as one of the drafters of the on-site marijuana consumption regulations, when I worked for AMCO, I would just confirm that freestanding was intended to just refer to the actual facility itself and not the consumption area within.
Okay.
And I do know that when we were receiving license applications early on in the process, that there are quite a few people who've been following very closely the on-site consumption regulations as the drafts have evolved, and have been trying to situate their businesses so that they could quickly comply with any rules that were adopted.
All right, thank you. So now, is CHAR involved in this as well?
CHAR is not directly involved.
Okay, but you're involved because you've been, your previous involvement and knowledge. Good, I appreciate that.
But she's also an executive member of the Alaska Marijuana Industry
Oh, okay.
Association.
Good. Well, that's valuable. Jed? Jana? Jeff?
All I can think of is, for edibles, it's not going to be much of an issue for inspectors, but once you start adding smoking to it and you expose our municipal employees to that environment, we're going to have a harder time finding inspectors that want to go into places to do the work that's required. So that's one of our concerns, is exposing our own employees to that environment. I mean, if their ventilation is working and the doors are set so that when the door doesn't blow the smoke out into the lobby, then it might not be too big of a problem. But if we're also going to be expected to kind of police or make sure that their rooms are set up correctly and that they are disposing of edibles that are left in the rooms correctly, then we're going to probably also need to have, we don't have any code enforcement in Title 10, where we're only 15 and 16 is all we're authorized for. So we may have to edit our code enforcement capabilities or add something that's 16 and 60 that would allow us to do more than what we do now. So and we are in these places at least once a year.
Okay, well, that's useful to know. So, okay. Can you give us some bullet points for next week that kind of, maybe those are only two, but maybe just think about what, I just want to make sure we have a checklist of every issue in front of us as we move forward. Is a week good enough time? I mean, we're not, we'll take the time it takes, but, since we have a meeting scheduled. Did I miss something? Heather?
I apologize. Just want to ask, the bullet points that you're asking for, could you send those out to full assembly members? What's the best way for us to get that?
You could, I'd say focus on this group, and I think if you send it to Mandy Honest, she'll get it distributed to everybody. Does that work for everyone? Does that work, Chris? Yes. Okay. Mark?
Yes, point of order and then a comment. Point of order, this discussion as according to your this says on-site consumption edible. So I was quite surprised to see that the attached ordinance was all about on-site consumption in smoking as well, even though it's not on the agenda. So to me, unless this agenda was modified, we shouldn't be discussing on-site marijuana consumption with smoking at all. So I think you need to let people know in public that, thank you, gentlemen. Thanks. that there is a discussion of the ordinance overall being done, because this to me is a very.
No, I appreciate that, and we had initially thought of it, we were just looking at edibles, but then when it came down, we got a version that took all of the state stuff and integrated it, so when I read it just a couple of days ago, I said, oh, this is dealing with smoking too, and I didn't catch that, so I think that's a good point. But we are very early, so I mean, basically what we're setting up today is a more full discussion of all of it next week, so I think you're right to call that out, but I don't know that decisions have been made.
For future, for next week anyways, that'd be good. My comment is, this is a very controversial issue. I hear comments from staff saying, well, when this happens and when we do it and so forth. To me, it's a question whether it happens or not. This is a right of our elected officials to choose whether we want this here. This is not a requirement of the state that we do this. It's very, very controversial. Stone drivers driving around killing people, which could happen, will happen as a result of this, is very controversial, because as I don't need to remind any of the assembly members here, the number one most important job they have as assembly members is public safety. Number one, beyond convenience, whether we have this year, this industry has the ability to start on-site consumption or not. Convenience of one industry is not the most important thing. It's public safety, and as you see on state and local, public safety has been the issue being talked about by people. I personally, our family has been affected greatly by smoking. My mother's had lung cancer twice, beloved mom, of course, we all have. And I think you will find a large crowd of people out at every stop of the way, whether we have the votes on the assembly or not, to stop on-site consumption. As I recall, the assembly passed the Clean Air Act, and there was a move by some industry people, Char and others, to kill it. And as I understand, it was a very high majority of Anchorage people voted to have clean air. There's lots and lots of issues to talk about. I've talked to very senior people in both APD and AFD, and they are not willing to send their staff, this is EMT, fire, and police, into a room where marijuana is being consumed by smoking. So no police, no fire. What if someone has a heart attack? Are they supposed to stand there and wait and have someone drag them out, contaminate the uniform? There's lots and lots of things that need to be put into an act if this is ever done. This is not a slam dunk, and I think you will find more and more people as this gets closer into the process. They're going to be very, very involved. It's going to be very difficult as assembly members perhaps to go through this process, but I think it's critical. Public safety is first. Here.
All right, thank you.
I'm Marge Stone King, Executive Director of the American Lung Association in Alaska, and I echo Mr. Butler's comments about the progression of this discussion being a foregone conclusion, particularly when you're talking about bifurcating the issue, but putting the language in to lay the plan and the foregone conclusion that the smoking will be allowed. May I remind you that marijuana smoking is illegal in Anchorage, indoors, in public places and workplaces. And yes, the Anchorage smoke-free ordinance back in 2007 was reaffirmed by the voters by 62%. Our most recent poll under the name ACS CAN, American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network, 3 years ago on a statewide basis, says that 79% of Alaskans favor inclusion of marijuana in secondhand smoke protection in smoke-free laws. And I am taking off my Lung Association hat now and saying that my assembly member and those on the east side of this room, I am appalled at your beholden behavior to the industry in this meeting.
Sir, I am not beholden. In fact, I'm a supporter and a believer.
I think she's talking to me.
No, she was talking to us both. And I just want to say that is, I am not beholden to anybody.
When you look to the industry
Yep.
for an answer, and you glance at them before you reply in a public meeting.
And then you smirk when I make a comment.
Okay, we'll go.
Yep. Please do not impugn my motives, because I believe you've overstepped your bounds. You have the right as a public to say that, but it also reflects on you.
Okay. This won't be productive for us now, so I appreciate your comments, and they're important. I don't think any of us expect that this will be quick and easy or a foregone conclusion. We dealt with this about a year and a half ago in a very lightweight, just to have a request to the AMCO to make a decision. And we got a huge amount of people after that, so I think we're all prepared for that.
Yeah,
So-
can I address that too? I'm sorry. There was information the industry had that we had to have to even go forward with discussion about whether bifurcation was necessary or not. It doesn't make me beholden, but we have to get information from the public, and we're regulating an industry. We have to hear from that industry. We have to know what they are actually experiencing. So, thank you.
Yeah, so thank you for that. And then we have two people, we didn't get your names when you came in, so if you'd like to speak, say your name for the recording and us, and any comments? Okay, what's your name?
Caleb.
Caleb, what's your last name? Two pluses, all right, thank you.
I'm Katie Stephens, and
All right, thank you. Mr. Hayward? We're talking on 2B. Are you-
Okay, you're not there. Okay, I'll wait till.
Okay. So I guess the plan is we will look at some way to possibly separate edibles and smoking, take out the issues that aren't related to consumption, and we'll meet again next week to, at this point, that's the only agenda item. I don't know if anything else is on. Does that work? Okay, so done with that. Audience participation? Eugene?
My name is Eugene Carlhaven. I represent myself. I live in Matthew Valley, follow the public process. When the public process is done appropriately, decision made by the governing body is more like a public interest. My comments are specifically concerning the meeting that just happened. I mean, still happening right now. In a few weeks, there will be new members of the Assembly. We don't know who they will be, but there will be new members of the Assembly. And they won't be, some of them won't be the members of the Assembly who are currently on the Assembly. Because that's the way it is. But my concern is the tape of the meeting, and I'm glad you guys are taping this meeting, and I'm glad there's access to good comments. But we still have a situation. There's been a situation in regard to, I'm glad there's 10 cards and names, but the fact is, if anyone's listening to the tape of these meetings, the fact is they don't know unless they recognize the voices of who is speaking. You need to recognize, the chair needs to recognize who speaks, and the party who speaks, whether out from this table or from the audience and so forth, the staff or whatever, you need to say who exactly they are. Otherwise, the public, assembly, even those who will listen to the tape in the future, will be in the dark, who's really talking. And then the last part is this. The idea on process is also including to give an opportunity to the public to get that information before this meeting, not before the meeting, just a minute before the meeting starts, but on the website. The website doesn't even have the agenda. What you have a note for this meeting is specifically the situation of the title, the committee, meeting, X date, time, and location. But there are striking issues that you discussed today, and there are people on the public who would like to know those issues that we're going to be here today, so they had a choice to decide, I want to make an effort to be here. And that closes my comment with 1 minute and 3 seconds to spare.
Good job, thank you. Anything else, broad audience participation? All right, well, thank you, everybody.